Dust swirled in the golden light of dusk, settling on the worn porch of a lonely rancher's home. Silence hung thick in the air, broken only by the soft creak of the wooden boards. A solitary figure stood, rugged hands resting on the railing, eyes scanning the horizon. In the shadow of the barn, a girl appeared, her hands marred by scars and the stories of her past. She caught his gaze, an unspoken bond igniting like the flicker of twilight. She wore a simple dress, frayed at the edges, but her spirit held something fierce within. As night fell, she stepped inside, the faint echo of piano keys breaking the stillness. Each note danced through the air, a haunting melody weaving through their unspoken pain. The rancher listened, his heart resonating with the music, and in that quiet moment, two souls began to tread the delicate path toward understanding. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty marketplace where the air hung heavy with tension. Eloan stood on the auction block, a cruel mockery of humanity, while the murmurs of the crowd swirled around her like dark clouds. Her eyes, a haunting grey, flickered towards the distant horizon, where the last light of day slowly succumbed to twilight. Every heartbeat replayed the moment her brother had bartered her away for a handful of coins, the betrayal still raw like the burns on her hands, remnants of a life that had been snatched away. She remembered the way his face had hardened, the flicker of shame drowned in the need for survival, his voice a whisper of indifference as he offered her to the highest bidder. Silas stood on the fringes of the crowd, eyes narrowed as the auctioneer bellowed his patter. As he took in the scene, he felt the pull of a familiar loneliness, a wound deep in his chest that echoed the emptiness of the barren land he called home. The sight of her, slim and fragile, the remnants of childhood innocence shattered by hard hands and harder choices, pricked at his heart in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had come for firewood, not to witness the sale of a girl. Yet drawn by a force greater than logic, his gaze locked onto her burned hands, the skin mottled and scarred, as if each mark told a story of pain and resistance. The auctioneer's voice droned on, floating through the air like smoke. Eloan stood silently, the shame of her situation choking her spirit. Her thoughts spiraled, filled with whispers of regret, echoing the words of her aunt, who had claimed there was no other way. Each hand raised in the crowd felt like a dagger, her worth weighed against the currency of despair. She longed for the comfort of music, for the familiar embrace of the piano keys that had often guided her through the darkest nights. But those memories felt like a life lived in another world, a realm now closed off to her. Silas stepped closer, his heart pounding as he stared at the girl's face, which was stricken with a blend of fear and resignation. The moment felt surreal, as if the world around him had blurred, only her presence remained vivid and undeniable. He thought of the ranch he owned, the isolation that permeated his days, the emptiness that followed him like a shadow. Perhaps she could be the spark to ignite some remnants of joy within those four walls. But he shook the thought away, reminding himself that he was just a lonely rancher. What comfort did he have to offer? When Eloan's gaze met his, he felt the full weight of her despair, something raw and unfiltered that threatened to unravel him. She was a wounded bird, a spirit ready to flee, yet trapped within the confines of her present. Silas was unaccustomed to feeling this way, compelled to act, yet fearful of his own intentions. He wrung his hands, torn between the knowledge of what he could afford and the urge to free her from this life that felt like a prison. Each tick of the clock echoed the moments fleeing from him, and he wondered if a girl like her could ever truly find solace in his home. The auctioneer's voice climbed higher, and the bidding war ignited around them, shattering the fragile moment they shared. Silas felt the tightening in his chest as the numbers rose, his palms clammy against the rough fabric of his trousers. He hadn't intended to buy a girl, yet there was something unshakable within him, a desire to reach across the chasm that divided them, to offer a hand of compassion against the cruel world that had cast her aside. But how could he save her when he himself was so lost? Would she even want to be saved by a stranger? With each new bid, Elowen's heart sank deeper. The faces around her morphed into grotesque masks, each one probing and calculating. She retreated inward, where the world was quieter, wrapped in the melody of memories that skirted just out of reach. The thought of being owned, of being reduced to a mere possession once again, suffocated her spirit. The piano, her only true friend, felt like a far-off dream, and she feared that the music that used to flow through her would soon turn to silence. As the price reached a fever pitch, personal battles raged within Silas. He clenched his fists, torn between reason and instinct. The ranch, his isolation, his well-worn routines felt like shackles, but what could he offer her? He was a man of the land, not a savior. In his mind, he wrestled with the thought of taking her away from this life, only to bring her into a world of loneliness he had known too well. His heart screamed for action, yet the weight of his own emptiness anchored him in place. The gavel slammed down, sealing her fate. Elowen blinked back tears, straining to breathe as she watched the winning bidder step forward, her heart heavy. A silence stretching between her and the world around her. Silas remained a silent observer, the emotional distance between them, a chasm unbridged. He turned away, his chest tight and aching, feeling the unraveling of something pure as he left the scene behind, burdened by the knowledge of what could have been. The sky hung low over the ranch, a heavy grey drape that swallowed the horizon. As Elowen stepped out of the wagon, the dry earth crunched beneath her feet like shattered dreams. Silas stood a few paces away, arms crossed, his weathered face a mask of somber neutrality. The house behind him loomed, its paint peeling like the memories of those who once inhabited it. She looked around, taking in the sprawling ranch, the skeletal trees offering little comfort against the chill in the air. In that moment, the vastness felt overwhelming, a silent reminder of the isolation that awaited her. Elowen tightened her grip on the tattered satchel that held her meager belongings, the coarse fabric scratching against her skin. Each step she took towards Silas felt weighted, as if the very land sought to anchor her in a past she wished to leave behind. Silas nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, before leading her inside the dimly lit house. The air was stale, thick with dust motes swirling in the faint rays of light that broke through the grimy windows. She caught sight of an old piano in the corner, its keys yellowed and chipped, yet the presence of it stirred something deep within her. With each passing moment, the silence between them felt more profound. Elowen stood awkwardly in the sparse living room, her heart echoing against the walls, a low thrum of uncertainty. Silas moved about, resolutely tending to his chores, his back turned to her as if she were a figment of his imagination. His routine was predictable, fetching wood, stoking the fire, but every motion held a weight of solitude that mirrored her own. The lonely rancher and the girl with burned hands, two figures entangled in this quiet despair. Elowen glanced out the window where the land stretched endlessly, a parched sea of brown and gold. Her mind wandered to the memories of laughter that filled her aunt's home, the echo of a piano playing in the background, a melody that felt like freedom. Here, sound was swallowed by the vastness of the ranch, leaving only a haunting silence. She reached out to touch the piano, her fingertips grazing the cool ivory, igniting a spark of longing within her. She wanted to play, to breathe life into the space around her, but the scars on her hands held her back. Days turned into weeks, each one a reflection of the last. And still, Elowen felt like a ghost in Silas's world. He worked tirelessly, returning home with the sun setting behind him, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Each evening he broke the stillness, only to eat a sparse meal and retreat to his thoughts. Elowen found herself lingering by the piano more often, her fingers hovering over the keys, yearning to break the silence that enveloped them. But she remained hesitant, trapped by the fear of remembering why she had stopped playing. One day, as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, Elowen gathered her courage. She sat on the worn bench and pressed her fingers down, allowing the sound to fill the empty room. The notes began tentatively, then gained strength, flowing out like the floodgates of her emotions had burst open. The melody soared, intertwining with the howl of the wind, creating a symphony that echoed through the walls. It was not just music. It was a desperate plea for connection, a bridge spanning the chasm between her and Silas. Silas paused in the other room, the familiar rhythm of routine disrupted by the delicate cascade of notes. He stood frozen, the wood he was carrying slipping from his grip, crashing to the floor. He felt an ache in his chest as he listened, the sound stirring something long buried within him. That piano had been a relic of happier days, a reminder of music that drew people together. And now it was filling the emptiness that had consumed him since he had lost everything. As Elowen continued to play, the air shifted, and she could sense Silas's presence behind her, a fleeting shadow. She pressed on, the music guiding her, pulling him closer until he finally stepped into the doorway. The flickering light cast soft shadows across his face, illuminating the weariness etched into his skin. For the first time, their eyes met, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a shared loneliness, a hope for something more. Elowen finished the piece, her fingers poised above the keys, breathless. The silence that followed was palpable, but not empty. In that space, they were no longer just a lonely rancher and a girl with burned hands. They were two intertwined souls, each longing for connection, each yearning for healing. The ranch, once a desolate prison, began to transform, slowly molded by the haunting beauty of the music as Elowen found her voice and Silas dared to listen. Elowen woke with the sun tipping its golden hat over the horizon, the warm light spilling through the window like honey over the pine floorboards. She lay for a moment, breathing in the scent of fresh earth and dew-soaked grass, savoring the stillness that blanketed the ranch. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, the scars from the fire that had marred her hands a constant reminder of the past. Nourishing sunlight poured in, and she let it wash over her, wishing for the warmth to seep into her very bones, erasing the chill that had settled there since she arrived. Silas had already been awake for hours, lost in the rhythm of the ranch. The horses whinnied softly in the distance, their breath visible against the crisp morning air. He fed them with a practiced ease, the motions automatic, yet something within him stirred as he thought of the girl he had bought. Elowen was unlike anything he had ever encountered, her resilience and vulnerability intertwined in a delicate battle. He found himself drawn to her, a thread of curiosity pulling tighter around his heart, even while he fought against the gentle tide of emotion that threatened to knock him off balance. Their mornings settled into an unspoken routine. After breakfast, Silas would head out to tend to the fields, while Elowen remained in the small kitchen, washing dishes and sweeping dust that always seemed to settle back down again. He could hear her humming, a melody that floated through the air, curling around him, urging him to turn back. It was a sound unfamiliar, yet achingly beautiful, and he found himself straining to catch the soft notes before they drifted away into the silence of the ranch. As weeks slogged on, Silas began to notice the spark of defiance in Elowen's emerald eyes whenever he asked her to do something. She would comply, but the clenching of her jaw and the subtle tightening of her fists betrayed her inner turmoil. It was clear that his ownership of her weighed heavily on her spirit. Silas wrestled with the duality of his role as her captor and protector, as the lines blurred, entwining their lives in unexpected ways. He felt the stirrings of guilt clawing at him, their fragile connection fraying under the weight of his growing curiosity. Elowen's evenings were spent at the piano, an instrument that had once been a refuge for her heart. She had found it tucked away in a corner of the barn, covered in dust and shadows. With each note, she poured her soul into the music, letting the pain of her past resonate through the hollow wooden keys. The melodies hung in the air, a lingering echo of joy and sorrow that wrapped around Silas like a warm cloak. He stood outside the barn long after the sun had dipped below the horizon, captivated and confused, wondering how a girl with burned hands could conjure such heart-stirring beauty. On one particularly haunting evening, Silas took a step closer, drawn by the haunting notes spilling from the barn. As he approached, Elowen's fingers danced frantically over the keys, her eyes glazed with concentration, lost to the world. Suddenly she faltered, the music fading as she noticed his presence. The silence that engulfed them was thick, hanging heavy with unspoken words. An awkward tension crackled between them, a persistent reminder of their unequal standing. Silas cleared his throat, uncertain of how to bridge the widening gap. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said finally, unable to keep the wonder from his voice. It felt strange to acknowledge her talent, as if he were granting her a glimmer of autonomy she did not yet possess. "You play beautifully." The words hung there, both a compliment and an acknowledgement of the unlikeliness of her existence within his rigid world. Elowen's cheeks flushed, a pink hue blooming across her face as if she had been spotted, the realization of his admiration stirring something deep within her. Hope, perhaps, or fear. Elowen leaned back from the piano, her fingers resting over the keys like a bird poised to take flight. "Music is just noise when you can't feel it," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, yet there was steel in her tone. "It reminds me of things I can't forget." Silas winced, the fragility of her statement washing over him, catching the deep-rooted hurt that lingered in her eyes. It was a truth he could not grasp entirely, a past that haunted her while he stood there, a mere shadow in her story, yet a pivotal force in her present. Unable to bear the weight of her gaze any longer, Silas turned to leave the barn, his heart pounding with the echo of her words. But as he reached the threshold, he hesitated, feeling the gravity of the unspoken pull between them. "You're not just here to be my servant, Elowen. I want you to know that." His voice quivered slightly, each syllable punctuated with the tension of their shared reality. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with emotions neither dared to voice, but both felt deeply, a burgeoning connection amidst the churning waters of their lives. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting an orange glow across the expansive fields of the ranch, where the golden grains swayed under the gentle caress of the evening breeze. Elowen sat on the porch, her calloused hands resting on her knees, feeling the familiar hum of loneliness brush against her skin like a fleeting memory. Silas moved about the yard, his silhouette outlined against the fading light as he tended to the horses. She caught glimpses of him, the way his strong shoulders rolled as he worked, the determined set of his jaw. They shared an unspoken bond, tethered by an understanding neither dared to voice. Days had turned into weeks since Silas had brought Elowen to his ranch, and she had found her bearings in this strange new world. Yet the scars on her hands were a constant reminder of what she had left behind, a past fraught with pain and betrayal. Silas, blind to her emotional turmoil, only saw the physical scars. He poured his heart into her rehabilitation, teaching her the art of ranching, but every time he noticed her burned hands, an unintentional shadow of discomfort crossed his face. She felt the weight of that discomfort, a ghost that haunted their conversations, creating a rift she couldn't quite articulate. Their shared silence was punctuated by the distant thuds of horses' hooves and the soft chirps of crickets welcoming the night. Elowen toyed with an abandoned piano that rested against the barn, its dust-covered keys igniting a flicker of nostalgia in her heart. Memories of her aunt's house streamed through her mind, the hurried melodies, the way her fingers danced gracefully over the keys, a momentary escape from their grim reality. She had once dreamed of playing for others, of sharing the music meant to heal, yet her music had turned to ash along with her hands. Silas approached her, breaking the stillness that enveloped the evening. "I got a new horse today," he said, excitement brimming in his voice. "Think you could help me train it tomorrow?" There was kindness in his eyes, a warmth that made Eowyn's heart race with gratitude and trepidation. "I'd like that," she replied softly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue as she dared to meet his gaze. The corners of his mouth lifted, but Eowyn felt the distance between them stretching, like an unbridgeable chasm filled with the echoes of unsaid thoughts. A sudden pang of vulnerability washed over her, and before she could second-guess herself, she blurted, "Do you see me, Silas?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and charged. The warmth faded from his expression, replaced by confusion, and she could have sworn she felt a shift in the very fabric of the world around them. "What do you mean?" he replied, his brow furrowing, the earnestness in his voice both comforting and painful. "I mean," she hesitated, her heart racing at the prospect of unveiling the truth behind her scars. "Do you truly see me? Past the hands, past the history, or am I just a way to fill your loneliness?" The words spilled forth, raw and unfiltered. She felt tears beginning to prick at her eyes, the vulnerability unraveling the tightly woven facade she had maintained since arriving at the ranch. Silas stood frozen, the weight of her honesty settling around them like the thickening nocturnal air. For a moment, his silence spoke volumes, and Eowyn could feel the uncharted territory of her emotions shift beneath her. She had clawed through life to survive, but here, exposed, she felt fragile and scared. The ache of longing for acceptance forced her to confront the very humanity she had been trying to bury. "I never meant for you to feel like that," Silas finally whispered, his voice tight. "You're not just a way to fill my loneliness. I care about you, Eowyn." She searched his eyes for sincerity, and there it lay, trembling in the dim light of dusk. But there was still a shadow lurking. The whispers of doubt tugged at her heartstrings. "Then why do you avoid looking at my hands?" she asked, the air thick with a mixture of fear and defiance. Silas's gaze fell to the porch, and for the first time, Eowyn felt the shame that gripped him, the embarrassment he carried for a past he couldn't fix. It pierced her deeper than the burns that marred her skin. Eowyn's breath caught in her throat, the walls around her heart compressing further. In that instant, the barrier cracked, revealing the depths of her loneliness and the flickering hope of connection. "I don't want you to feel sorry for me," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I just want you to see me." Silas lifted his gaze, the truth of her words reflected in the rawness of his eyes, challenging them both to step onto the precipice of vulnerability, a leap into the unknown that could either bind them closer or shatter everything they had begun to build. Eowyn sat on the old wooden bench in Silas's modest living room, the sun filtering through the dusty windows and casting golden patterns on the floor. It was a far cry from the bustling urban life she had once known, yet the air felt lighter here, as if the weight of her burned past was slowly lifting. The piano, an ancient upright with chipped ivory keys, stood invitingly in the corner, decorated with half-faded photographs of a life Silas had built in his solitude. She tentatively brushed her fingers over the keys, hesitant at first, but the residual warmth from their collective memories pulled her in. Silas watched her from the doorway, an uncharacteristic softness clouding his usually stoic demeanor. His calloused hands were stuffed into his pockets, and the sun glinted off the dust motes, swirling in the golden light, creating a moment suspended in time. He had long grown accustomed to silence, but this silence felt different, alive with possibilities. The lingering shadows of their past struggles enveloped them both, threading a delicate bond between their shared isolation, a bond born from pain and solitude. Eowyn took a deep breath, remembering the way music used to cradle her during the darker days. She began to play, her fingers dancing tentatively over the keys, initially unsure of herself. But as the first notes broke the stillness, a tremor of recognition shivered through her. She poured herself into the melody, her emotions spilling out in a way words could never convey. Each note felt like a revelation, unlocking pieces of herself she had thought lost forever. Silas felt every note wrap around him like a warm blanket, his heart swelling at the sight before him. He was no stranger to heartache, but witnessing Elowen summon her spirit through the music stirred something dormant within him, something he had thought time had buried deep. He stepped closer, appreciating the way the sunlight caught the strands of her hair, illuminating her in an almost ethereal glow. In that moment, the weight of his loneliness lifted, and he felt an undeniable urge to protect the fragile beauty he saw before him. Elowen's fingers began to shake with the intensity of her emotions, a mix of fear and exhilaration, as her past bubbled just beneath the surface. The ache of her burned hands reminded her of her painful history, the scars not just on her skin, but etched deep within her soul. Just as she teetered on the brink of vulnerability, Silas took a step forward, his presence grounding her. He gently placed his hand over hers, stilling her fingers on the keys. At first, the world around them faded away, the air thick with unspoken words. Silas's touch, warm and rough, offered solace. It was a simple gesture, yet powerful enough to bridge the chasm of their disconnection. Elowen looked up, her eyes meeting his, searching for confirmation, for assurance that she was not alone in her pain. Silas nodded slightly, his expression earnest, signaling that he understood, not just the music, but the depths of what lay beneath it. Encouraged by his silent affirmation, Elowen played once more, this time with renewed confidence. The melody transformed, weaving in the hurt and the happiness that coexisted within her. Each note resonated not just within the walls of the ranch, but between them, a dialogue of unspoken understanding. Silas leaned against the doorframe, entranced by the connection forming through art, the music binding their hearts in ways words could never articulate. As the final notes lingered in the air, Elowen released a breath she didn't know she was holding. The moment hung like the fading light of dusk, fragile yet filled with promise. She felt seen, truly seen for the first time in so long. And in that moment, Silas stepped forward, his fingertips brushing her wrist lightly, as if to say, "You are safe here." There was a hint of something more in that gesture, a whisper of hope, a shared acknowledgement of their intertwined fates. Maybe this was the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated, a weaving together of two broken souls into one tapestry of resilience. As they sat in the fading light, Elowen knew that the ranch, with its aching silence, now held the melody of potential redemption, echoing softly in the space between them. Elowen sat at the edge of the grand piano, her fingers hovering above the keys, the polished surface gleaming under the soft glow of the oil lamp. The room was filled with silence, the kind that wrapped around her like an embrace and constricted her throat. She had been at Silas's ranch for weeks now, her burned hands tender, yet yearning for the catharsis that music had once brought her. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut hay and the lingering sadness of an unvoiced sorrow. It felt like a weight pressing down on her chest each time she opened her mouth. Silas moved quietly behind her, his presence large and steady, yet she felt the distance between them like an uncrossable canyon. He had been kind when he brought her, more kindness than she had ever known, but there were walls she could not break through, and she was terrified of the fractures that had formed in her heart. Her thoughts circled around what she wanted to say, but the words slipped away like shadows when dawn breaks. She yearned to thank him, to speak of the storm of emotions that whirled inside, yet each attempt was met with silence. Elowen's fingers brushed against the keys, and a low note echoed softly into the quiet space. The sound unfurled within her, coaxing memories of nights spent in a different life, the warmth of her aunt's laughter blending with the melodies that danced in the air. But here, in this ranch, where solitude hovered like a spectre, her hands trembled with uncertainty and fear. The burned scars felt alive, reminding her of the past she couldn't escape. She turned her head slightly, catching a glimpse of Silas leaning against the doorframe, his sturdy silhouette framed by the fading twilight. In that moment, Elowen felt something within her shift, a flicker of resolve, fighting against the cacophony of doubt. She had seen Silas's tenderness in the way he cared for the horses, in the gentle command he held over the land, and in his quiet determination to carve a place for her in his life. But she was shackled by the belief that her words would be a burden, a reminder of what she had lost and the pain that had poured like molten fire into her veins. She inhaled deeply, a surge of oxygen fueling a timid hope that maybe she could rise above the torment of her insecurities. Silas moved closer, his footsteps muted against the wooden floor, and the heat of his presence enveloped her. "Elowen," he said softly, and the sound of her name hung in the air like music. The way he spoke, it held an unspoken promise, a safe harbor in her turbulent sea. She turned fully now, capturing his gaze, and within those quiet depths, she found an invitation, a bridge across the gulf where silence had reigned for too long. His eyes mirrored the storm she felt inside, a mixture of patience and longing, and it was then that Elowen realized it wasn't just her scars that had made her silent. It was the fear of being vulnerable, of stepping into the light with all her imperfections exposed. She had been afraid that her voice would quiver, that she would break apart under the weight of his attention. But the love she sensed in him sparked a shift, igniting a flicker of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Silas," she finally whispered, the word escaping like a fragile bird, tentative but alive. It felt surreal, her voice breaking the stillness that surrounded them. He leaned in closer, his expression unwavering, an unbroken bond forming between them. The first whispered syllables released a wave of clarity in Elowen, lifting the fog that had settled around her heart. She understood now that speaking, sharing her truth, didn't diminish her. It made her stronger. Each word could be a step toward healing. The scent of cedar and earth filled her lungs, and with each breath, Elowen started to find her rhythm. "I want to play," she murmured, hesitantly reaching for the keys again. The significance of her words flowed between them, a pact being formed. Silas understood. He could see the fire igniting in her eyes. She placed her hands on the piano, the pressure of their weight suddenly anchoring her to the moment. As the first melodic notes rang out, she felt the past and future intertwine beautifully. The pain and fear transformed into chords of hope, and with each note she played, the barriers that had confined her voice began to shatter. In the symphony of their shared silence, Elowen spoke not just with sounds, but with her heart, the music becoming the words she hadn't known how to say. Silas stood beside her, a guardian of her emerging spirit, and in that sacred space, she finally began to reclaim not only her voice, but her place in the world. Elowen sat on the back porch, the wooden planks creaking beneath her as she ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the piano, the intricate carvings blurred under the fading light of dusk. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and the distant hum of crickets beginning their evening chorus. A hush enveloped the ranch, wrapping her in a cocoon of solitude and reflection. Shadows danced along the edges of the porch, mingling with memories that often visited her at twilight. She could still feel the burn of the sun on her hands and the coolness of the water from the creek, but now all she felt was a heavy stillness, mirroring the weight that had lingered in her heart for far too long. Silas appeared in the doorway, the silhouette of his form framed by the waning light. He had worked long into the day, his calloused hands stained with earth and toil, an embodiment of the land they had come to nurture together. His eyes caught hers, and for a fleeting moment, Elowen could sense the unspoken bond that connected them, a tether woven through shared silence and whispered dreams. She had once feared this closeness, had shied away from the feelings that stirred inside her like a torrent. But now, against the backdrop of the evening, she felt herself unraveling, inching toward the precipice of revelation. Silas stepped closer, the weight of his presence both grounding and exhilarating. He leaned against the porch railing, watching her as she hesitated over the keys, fingers trembling. The piano, a relic of laughter and sorrow, had become more than an instrument. It was a vessel for everything left unsaid, echoing the depths of her soul. She recalled how she had first played, letting notes cascade like falling leaves, each one a reminder of the pain she had tried to escape. Yet here, with Silas standing guard against the encroaching night, she felt a daring surge within her. "Play," Silas murmured, his voice a low rumble that broke the stillness. "Play for me." The command held a mix of authority and gentleness, igniting a spark of courage in her. Elowen nodded slowly, allowing herself to breathe in the moment, the air thick with possibilities. As her fingers finally hovered over the keys, she closed her eyes, surrendering to the music that had once felt like a foreign language. Each note was a brushstroke against a canvas of emotion, memories of loss, fragments of hope, and threads of longing that tethered her to this very moment. The melody began softly, a tentative whisper that gradually unfolded into a passionate crescendo. Elowen poured her heart into the piano, the music flowing through her like a river liberated from a dam. She played for the girl she had been, the lessons learned, and the scars that had melted into the fabric of her being. But more profoundly, she played for Silas, for the tenderness he had shown her when the world felt cold and unforgiving. Each chord sang of the journey they had taken, two souls intertwined, grappling with their pasts as they dared to dream of a future together. As the final notes lingered in the air, a silence enveloped them, thick and palpable. Elowen opened her eyes, breathless, heart racing. Silas stood with an expression she had never seen before, a fusion of admiration and something deeper, something that ignited a fire in her chest. In that moment, she understood the power of words unspoken, the weight they carried. She had long been bound by the chains of her past, but here, with Silas, she felt the rust of those chains begin to crumble. "Silas," she finally breathed, her voice scarcely more than a whisper, but laced with every ounce of strength she could muster. The name hung in the air like a delicate thread woven between them, a promise spoken into existence. She had held it back for so long, fearing the vulnerability it invited, but now it spilled forth, an invocation of everything they had built together, trust, healing, and an undeniable connection that transcended words. The sound itself felt like a sacred offering, a liberation of her spirit. His gaze softened, a warmth radiating from him that made her breath hitch. "Elowen," he replied, the weight of her name a familiar embrace on his lips. In that single exchange, everything they had endured coalesced into a moment of shared truth. The world around them faded, time stretching and bending as the colors of the sunset bled together, a vivid tapestry of their emotions. There was no need for grand declarations. Their hearts spoke in the language of glances and breath, the promise of love forged in the fire of their scars. Elowen reached for Silas, her hand trembling slightly as it found his. Fingers entwined, the warmth of human connection igniting a spark that resonated deep within her. At that moment, she was no longer the girl with burned hands, nor exclusively the lonely rancher's companion. Side by side, they stood as equals, two beings resonating with the same rhythm, a symphony conducted by their shared past and hopeful future. Together, they faced the horizon, ready to embrace whatever came next, fortified by the truth of their hearts and the names that now felt like home. Silas stood at the edge of the field, the horizon ablaze with the dying sun, painting the sky in strokes of crimson and gold. A gentle breeze rustled through the tall grasses, whispering secrets only the earth could understand. Elowen sat on the creaking porch steps, her fingers tracing the scars on her palms, each mark a story of survival wrapped in silence. The piano, now a weathered memory nestled in the corner of the room, held echoes of her laughter and sorrow, a bittersweet melody that lingered in the air like a fading dream. Silas turned, his heart heavy, yet lighter somehow, as he approached the girl who had begun to mend the fraying edges of his solitude. He knelt beside her, the dust from the ground swirling around them, and reached for her hand. Softly, he placed her scarred palm against his own, tracing the lines of pain and hope that intertwined their lives. The world around them fell into a hush, nature holding its breath as they shared a moment woven from longing and acceptance. In that quiet, they found a language beyond words, an unspoken promise that together they could compose a new symphony, one of healing, love, and resilience.